On March 1st, 1942, the irreversible operational break came when a Japanese 8-inch shell struck a boiler room of His Majesty's ship Exeter. The hit started a large fire, forced the boiler room to be abandoned, and began the loss of steam pressure that crippled the 10,490-ton heavy cruiser. A warship of 575 feet depended on that steam and its electrical output for propulsion, communications, fire control, and the heavy machinery that kept her weapons fighting. As pressure fell, the main engines had to stop. One dynamo survived only until steam failed to it as well. Main and secondary armament control failed with the power chain, turning Exeter from a fighting unit into a slowing steel target in the Java Sea. Surrounded by Japanese heavy cruisers and destroyers, the operational reality became absolute. Unable to evade or fight effectively, the vessel faced destruction or capture. The commanding officer made the calculated tactical decision to ensure the ship did not fall into enemy hands. The order was given to sink the ship, and a few minutes later, the order was given to abandon ship. After Exeter had been abandoned, the Japanese destroyer Inazuma delivered the coup de grace later confirmed by survey evidence. 2 torpedoes struck the starboard side of the paralyzed cruiser. One torpedo hit amidships and blew out part of the bottom of the hull. The other hit just forward of a turret and nearly severed the bow. The damage destroyed watertight integrity on the starboard side and accelerated the ship's final flooding, overpowering any remaining chance of controlled scuttling. By the time abandoning was completed, Exeter had already settled with a list to port. After the torpedo explosion on the starboard side amidships, the ship quickly righted, rolled over to starboard, and sank at about 11:50. The final roll was violent and fast, but the documented sequence is port list, righting, starboard roll, and disappearance beneath the Java Sea. The surviving commanding officer later provided the best position he could reconstruct in his post-war after-action report. Captain Gordon stressed that all shipboard records had gone down with Exeter, so his position was an estimated geographic baseline rather than a fixed final log. When the wreck was finally found about 60 miles from that estimate, the gap confirmed that the wartime position could guide the search but could not define the site. The massive steel hull slammed into the seabed, tearing deep into the sediment and coming to rest heavily on her starboard side. The violent entry into the mud sealed the lower flooded compartments and arrested her downward momentum. Far above her, the ocean surface smoothed over, and Exeter began a 60-year disappearance beneath the Java Sea. When a sovereign warship sinks in combat, its status does not simply vanish with the hull. The heavy cruiser had disappeared into the Java Sea, where the wreck was later found at roughly 200 feet, or about 61 meters. At that depth, survey and diving operations face real technical limits. Compressed gas planning, decompression exposure, visibility, currents, and the difficulty of working around a large, corroding steel structure. The more durable barrier was legal, sovereign immunity. A commissioned naval vessel remains the property of its flag state after sinking, unless that state clearly abandons it. For Exeter, that meant the wreck remained a Royal Navy vessel and a British military wreck, not an abandoned merchant ship open to ordinary commercial salvage. Later British statements also described Exeter and Encounter as protected places under the United Kingdom's Protection of Military Remains Act 1986, while recognizing that overseas protection depends on cooperation with coastal states. This status also carried the ethical force of a military grave. Men died in and around the ship during active combat, and the site was expected to be respected and left undisturbed without British consent. But the protection was not an impenetrable firewall. It was a legal and diplomatic claim that still depended, in Indonesian waters, on practical enforcement and cooperation between governments. This administrative reality narrowed any future expedition to external documentation. Investigators could photograph, map, and observe, but recovery of brass, deck plating, fittings, or structural material would have crossed from survey into disturbance. Side-scan sonar, video, still photography, and careful external observation could build identification evidence while preserving the site. That left a narrow but workable search logic. Sweep the seabed from the surface, then put eyes on the target for identification. Oceanographic sensors face a fundamental limit when sweeping deep water. Acoustic waves can detect massive anomalies across wide marine grids, but they cannot read a name, confirm a flag, or verify historical identity. From 2002 onward, the motor vessel Empress, owned and skippered by Vidar Skogli, repeatedly searched Java sea wreck positions with side-scan sonar. The team discovered many wrecks during those years, and in February 2007 they made a dedicated search for Exeter. The official and unofficial sinking positions had failed to produce the cruiser, so the team expanded the search box far beyond Captain Gordon's very approximate post-war position. Covering this enlarged area required side-scan sonar. The towfish could be run above the seabed, projecting sound sideways and returning shadows from hard, artificial shapes below. When sound struck a large steel object, the shadow and return helped operators judge size, outline, and orientation. It was an ideal first-stage search tool because it could isolate a candidate wreck across a wide grid, but it could not complete the identification. The target still needed visual confirmation by divers and cameras. Executing this method demanded patience. The search was not a continuous 5-year tow over one empty grid, but a repeated effort across official positions, unofficial positions, and other possible sites in the Java Sea. The Empress team used sonar search boxes and direct dives where targets justified it, eliminating false returns and unrelated wrecks until the last legs of a large search box produced a promising anomaly. Finally, in February 2007, the acoustic search yielded a major return. The sonar showed a large artificial target on the seabed, one whose size and shape demanded investigation. The return did not by itself establish the ship's identity. It did provide a precise target position about 60 miles from Captain Gordon's estimate, moving the investigation from broad uncertainty to a specific wreck. A hard proof limit still governed the discovery. Acoustic geometry could show a massive structure whose length matched Exeter, but it could not identify battle damage or distinguish with certainty between similar warships. The search grid was closed. The case now required divers, cameras, and visible ship-specific features. A 575-foot steel anomaly resting on the ocean floor presented a strict geometry trap. Scale could strongly suggest a heavy cruiser, but only visible features could prove Exeter. To break that trap, the Empress team dived the wreck with video cameras, comparing external shape, armament layout, damage, bow form, and superstructure arrangement against plans, photographs, and combat history. As the divers descended, Exeter's shape emerged out of the gloom. The wreck lay on her starboard side, largely coherent from bow to stern, although parts of the bridge superstructure and mast had collapsed toward the seabed. The team filmed along the wreck, building a visual record rather than taking artifacts. The main 8-inch guns provided one of the strongest visual cues. The forward turrets were trained toward the starboard aft quarter, close to their maximum aft bearing, and their barrels sat only just above level, around 10 degrees at most. That orientation matched the tactical picture of Exeter still trying to fight enemies on her starboard side before power and control failed. Other visible damage also fit the combat record. Survey descriptions placed severe shell and fire damage around the superstructure, while Captain Gordon's report records the vital hit in a boiler room that started the fatal loss of steam and power. The visual evidence did not need a single perfect nameplate or a single dramatic shell hole. It worked by matching many external features to the known ship. This combined visual data produced the positive identification. The size, layout, armament, torpedo damage, orientation, and recorded video evidence matched Exeter closely enough for the Discovery team to delay public announcement until better imagery could confirm the identity beyond reasonable doubt. The target was not verified by untouched remote geometry alone. It was identified by sonar, technical diving, and careful visual documentation. Even after identification, the survey's proof ceiling remained external. Intrusive penetration into damaged machinery spaces or compartments would have turned documentation into disturbance, leaving the boiler room damage, lower deck flooding, and full structural failure sequence mostly beyond direct observation. The forensic investigation of the main hull had reached the practical limit of a respectful survey. By the end of the dives, Exeter had been identified and externally recorded without turning the site into a salvage operation. In April 2008, during a later return by the motor vessel Empress, the team left a Royal Navy ensign attached to the wreck's torpedo tubes in honor of Exeter's crew and those who died. A massive steel shipwreck cannot simply dissolve into the ocean floor. Yet in 2016, sonar and three-dimensional seabed mapping in the Java Sea revealed a profound physical contradiction. A Dutch-funded expedition had gone to document wartime wrecks ahead of the approaching 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Java Sea, then broadened its scope when Dutch sites were found missing. At Exeter's known position, the equipment did not return the standing form of a cruiser. It showed a large hole in the seabed where the wreck had been, and the ship had been almost completely removed. The motive for this erasure was economic, but the exact mix of incentives is difficult to prove. Pre-atomic low-background steel has been cited as one possible attraction because wartime hull plates were forged before atmospheric nuclear testing changed global background radiation. But investigators and journalists also point to ordinary scrap value, copper wiring, brass pipework, bronze propellers, and other non-ferrous metals. The safer conclusion is that Exeter was targeted as part of a broader illegal scrap operation, with low background steel as one possible motive rather than the single proven cause. The physical removal appears to have been an industrial, illegal salvage operation rather than souvenir looting by casual divers. Reports on the Java Sea wrecks describe salvage vessels using heavy grabs, cranes, and sometimes explosives to tear wrecks apart and recover saleable metal. For Exeter, the result seen in 2016 was not a neatly excavated archaeological recovery, but the near-total removal of a warship from the seabed. Steel, copper, brass, bronze, and other scrappable material were taken, while the historic structure was destroyed in the process. Faced with this destruction, the 2016 survey shifted from commemoration and condition assessment toward forensic documentation of the removal footprint. Around that void, the remaining evidence was scattered and fragmentary. Public accounts describe large holes and disturbed seabed rather than a coherent surviving cruiser. The exact catalog of every remaining fragment is not publicly established, but the essential fact was clear. The primary wreck had been almost completely removed. By sweeping the empty trench and surrounding disturbance, the expedition secured a stark positive knowledge gain. The acoustic mapping documented the scale and geometry of the removal and showed that Exeter was no longer present as a coherent wreck. The data supported the conclusion that the heavy cruiser had been almost completely salvaged from the ocean floor. However, the violent nature of the extraction imposed a severe limit on any further historical or engineering investigation. Because the wreck had been torn apart without archaeological recording, the context of previously sealed internal battle damage was largely lost. Any fragments left in the mud could still have limited evidentiary value, but the coherent physical asset, the hull, its compartments, and its relationships between damage points, had been erased as a studyable site. 10,490 tons of commissioned steel, legally protected under international sovereign frameworks, was physically erased from the bottom of the Java Sea. The staggering mathematics of this illegal extraction redefined the modern understanding of maritime security. A massive, heavy cruiser spanning 575 feet in length and resting beneath 200 feet of ocean pressure had been completely hauled away by commercial scavengers. The sheer industrial scale required to blindly shred and raise a warship of that magnitude forced a radical shift in how naval authorities evaluate the safety of deep water wreck sites globally. This absolute removal represents a condition of irreversible archaeological deletion. When a shipwreck slowly collapses through natural marine degradation, the site retains its forensic footprint. The sequence of rust, the collapsing bulkheads, and the scattered armor still yield data about the original battle damage and the progression of structural decay. However, mechanical clamshell extraction destroys this natural timeline instantly. By violently tearing the structural components away and dumping the unrecognizable fragments back into the mud, the scavengers completely zeroed out the historical baseline. The site can never be reassessed, and the previously sealed interior spaces can never be studied with future, more advanced sensor arrays. The physical timeline is permanently severed. The profound institutional fallout from this deletion rippled far beyond the immediate waters of the Java Sea. The realization that highly organized commercial outfits were systematically targeting sovereign war graves for their pre-atomic steel shattered the assumption that depth and legal status offered any real protection. Naval administrations globally recognized an immediate industrial threat to deep water heritage sites. If heavy cruisers could be completely removed without drawing the attention of local maritime patrols, then hundreds of similarly classified sites across the Pacific and European theaters were highly vulnerable. The acoustic footprint mapped by the expedition transformed from a simple condition report into a stark, undeniable warning about the severe limits of administrative enforcement. Within the strict parameters of the remote investigations, this harsh reality yielded a highly specific positive knowledge gain. The forensic acoustic void mapped by the survey served as the ultimate, indisputable proof of this global vulnerability. The 2016 expedition completely achieved its mandate to assess and record the physical status of the war grave. By meticulously sweeping the empty trench and mathematically verifying that 100% of the primary hull was gone, the team delivered precisely the data required by the naval authorities. The expedition provided the exact forensic dimensions of the loss, confirming the threat level through unassailable acoustic evidence. Yet this physical loss imposes the ultimate management problem. Heritage protection normally has a central asset to monitor: a hull, a debris field, a turret, a machinery space, or an identifiable structure. Once the cruiser had been almost completely removed, practical stewardship became far harder. The sovereign claim and military grave status did not disappear, but enforcement had to shift from guarding an intact wreck to investigating desecration, preserving records, and working with regional authorities to prevent further damage at other sites. Despite the loss of the vessel, the long operational arc of the investigations still holds value. In 2007, the Empress team used side-scan sonar, diving, video, and visual comparison to locate and identify Exeter and to record her baseline condition. 9 years later, the 2016 survey documented the shocking absence, the near-total removal of the wreck and the seabed footprint left behind. Taken together, the two records preserve both what was found and what was lost, even though the ship itself can no longer be protected as an intact physical site.